Hello, everybody. This is Pastor. We are here again today, this time in Mark chapter 5. We're reading verses 1 through 20. I also want to address the creation, and I'm going to show you guys a video. Genesis chapter 1 tells us God created. In Isaiah tells us that it was perfect, but in verse 2 of Genesis says that it became chaotic and void. Isaiah and Ezekiel speak of Satan's rebellion and war against God. Planet Rahab is the fifth planet in our solar system where Satan stages war against God. Today it's only an asteroid belt. Psalm 89:10. Comets are evolved matter such as water, and water can only grow on a habitable planet, not in the void of space. This is iridium found on Earth and on the moon. This is evidence of the destruction of planet Rahab. This is what the solar system should look like. This is what it is today. And in the following interview, they explain what happened to Mars.
Mistake, and we would end up in a nuclear war.
And you think this mistake happened on Mars?
That's when things got interesting, because as I was contemplating all of this
Here
on Earth, I became aware of the work of DePietro and Molinar finding a face and also a pyramid, nearby pyramid
Right.
on Mars at Cydonia Mensa.
Yeah.
And my heart leaped because I thought, oh my goodness, if we can find a dead civilization on Mars, this will change the conversation on Earth. We can break out of this kind of Cold War mindset. And I mentioned this to this fellow I was standing next to in line, and he said, let me see that. And he looked at it, and he had this amazed look on his face, and he said, someone nuked them.
Whoa, just like that?
Just like that. And he looked at me, and he said it a second time. That means someone nuked them.
And he was dead serious.
He was dead serious. The nuclear weapons experts I have shown this to just say, yes, you've got it right. But the best working hypothesis is that Mars was like Earth and developed a indigenous humanoid species, and somebody attacked them from space, because the explosions were air bursts of two massive nuclear weapons.
How big would they be?
Oh,
What would they look like?
They would have looked like the Empire State Building.
That big?
The iridium found on planet Earth is evidence of the destruction of planet Rahab. In verse 2, it uses a word in Genesis, asa, meaning to mold a substance that already exists. In other words, it's a remodeling of our solar system after the war, the angelic war that took place in the heavens. And in the Gospel of John, it says, in the beginning was the Word. It's logos, meaning the mind creationist of God that brings order to the universe. When God created Adam and Eve, Satan was already a fallen entity. As far as the iridium, the element 77 that's on our periodic table, scientists call it heavy bombardment, meaning that's how it came to Earth. That's what they call it. But there is no explanation except for the one that we just showed you. The destruction of planet Rahab, that asteroid belt that was once a planet. The destruction of Mars, and even in Genesis where it says it became chaotic and void, that is the accurate translation from the Hebrew. And now it's back to Mark chapter 5 verses 1 through 20.
Mark chapter 5. And they came over under the other side of the sea, into the country of the Gadarenes. And when he was come out of the ship, immediately there met him out of the tombs a man with an unclean spirit, who had his dwelling among the tombs, and no man could bind him, no, not with chains. Because that he had often been bound with fetters and chains, and the chains had been plucked asunder by him, and the fetters broken in pieces, neither could any man tame him. And always, night and day, he was in the mountains and in the tombs, crying and cutting himself with stones. But when he saw Jesus afar off, he ran and worshipped him, and cried with a loud voice, and said, What have I to do with thee, Jesus, thou Son of the Most High God? I abjure thee by God, that thou torment me not. For he said unto him, Come out of the man, thou unclean spirit. And he asked him, What is thy name? And he answered, saying, My name is Legion, for we are many. And he besought him much that he would not send them away out of the country. Now there was there, nigh unto the mountains, a great herd of swine feeding. And all the devils besought him, saying, Send us into the swine, that we may enter into them. And forthwith Jesus gave them leave, and the unclean spirits went out, and entered into the swine. And the herd ran violently down a steep place into the sea. They were about 2,000, and were choked in the sea. And they that fed the swine fled, and told it in the city and in the country. And they went out to see what it was that was done. And they came to Jesus, and see him that was possessed with the devil, and had the legion, sitting and clothed, and in his right mind, and they were afraid. And they that saw it told them how it befell to him that was possessed with the devil, and also concerning the swine. And they began to pray him to depart from their coasts. And when he was come into the ship, he that had been possessed with the devil prayed him that he might be with him. Howbeit Jesus suffered him not, but saith unto him, Go home to thy friends, and tell them how great things the Lord hath done for thee, and hath had compassion on thee. And he departed, and began to publish in Decapolis how great things Jesus had done for him.
And that was Mark chapter 5, verses 1 through 20. Now we see that Jesus was in Gentile territory because these people were tending pigs, something Jews would never do. In fact, if you read the Torah, you'd see that pigs is an unclean animal and not to be touched. Now, the name of this demon-possessed individual, the nickname that he had, was Legion. And that term was used to describe a battalion, so to speak, of anywhere between 3,000 to about 6,000, including cavalry. In the book of Enoch, as we mentioned in one of our previous transmissions, the book of Enoch tells us that demons are the disembodied spirits of the Nephilim. The Nephilim that were a race of giants that were killed off during Noah's flood. And we also spoke of how the Smithsonians have found the remains of the giants, but they did a cover-up because they embraced the Powell doctrine, which is a pro-Darwinian evolution doctrine. Funny thing is, there are over 1,000 flood legends all over the world. Everywhere from the Native American Indians to the Bible, the Greeks, the Hindus, the Chinese, the Mayas, Incas, all over the world. And yet the only thing we have for Darwinian evolution is Charles Darwin's book, 1859, Origin of Species. And that's it. Anyway, back to the topic of the demons. In the Apocrypha, Apocalypse of Baruch, it tells us the number of giants that died during this great flood. It was 409,000. And those dead giants, or the demons, are the spirits of those beings. In James chapter 2, verse 19, it says, You believe that there is one God. Good. Even demons believe that and tremble with fear. These guys are afraid of Jesus. That's why it's important for people to be right with God and be filled with the Holy Spirit, so that these entities cannot come nowhere near you or mess with you. It says that after Jesus had healed this man, it said that people were afraid and they asked Jesus to leave. And you ask yourself, why? I mean, Jesus just performed a supernatural miracle. He healed a guy that was basically nobody can tame. This guy was basically unconquerable. And Jesus healed him. Well, the answer is quite simple. You see, 2,000 pigs is a huge economic loss. In other words, people rather make money than be right with God. And you know what? It's no different today. There are people today that sell their souls for money. People love money and they love sin more than being right with God. Now, this guy that was healed. He was so grateful. It says that he went into the Decapolis, which means 10 cities. And he evangelized and he told everybody everything of what God had done for him. We're going to stop right here and we will continue in Mark chapter 5. Thank you.
Procediendo ignición del mini retro Anarquía FF2001, modo experimental. Preparados para iniciar simulación.
Hello everybody, this is Pastor Sam, another transmission from the Gospel of Mark chapter 5 verses 21 through 43. But before we go there, I'm going to address a little bit on the issue of Alexander the Great and his conquest of the Holy Land, the events that took place. We're talking about the year 330 BC. And so Alexander the Great sent a letter to the Jewish high priest Jaddua, asking him to side with the Greeks in his conflict with the Persians. And Jaddua replied, he said, no, because we already have treaties with the Persians. So Alexander was furious, and he said he was going to make an example out of this high priest and make an example for the rest of the world to see this is what happens to those who make or keep treaties with the Persians. Well, when Alexander and his army arrived in Gaza, the Jewish high priest and the Jews were in agony. So they went to God. They turned to God in prayer. And that very night, God answered in a dream to Jaddua, the high priest. God told him to open up the city of Jerusalem for all the priests to be dressed in white and to decorate the city and to receive the king, and that no harm would befall the Jews. Well, Jaddua was obedient. They did exactly that. So when the Greek army was approaching, Alexander saluted the Jewish high priest and he worshipped them. And people were surprised by it, like the kings of Syria and so on. And they asked Alexander, why did you do what you did? And so Alexander said that when he was in Macedonia and he was contemplating how he was going to conquer Persia, he had a dream. And in that dream, he had a vision and he saw that high priest in that vision. Now, mind you, the Jewish high priest had a crown and it had a plate of gold, and it had the name of God written on that plate of gold. And so Alexander said that when he saluted the high priest, he was not really saluting him, but God. And Alexander said that he believed he brought his army under divine providence. That everything Alexander was going to set out to do, he was going to accomplish, which was the conquest of Persia. Later on, the Jews opened up the book of Daniel to Alexander, like chapter 8, chapter 11. And they showed him the passages from the prophet Daniel from 200 years before that predicted that a Persian king, that the Persians would be defeated by a Greek king. That the shaggy goat was the king of Greece. When Alexander saw this and he read it from the Bible itself, from the book of Daniel, he knew that prophecy was talking about him. And therefore he let the Jews have freedom of worship. The Jews had it so good under the reign of Alexander that the Samaritans, who were planning to loot the Jews after the Greeks had destroyed them, changed their minds and were trying to pass themselves off as Jews. So that's it, folks. That's what happened. That's the episode when Alexander the Great went to Jerusalem. And, we all know he conquered Persia, and it became the Greek Empire afterwards. And that was Bible prophecy in fulfillment from the book of Daniel from 200 years prior. And now, to the Gospel of Mark.
And all men did marvel. And when Jesus was passed over again by ship unto the other side, much people gathered unto him, and he was nigh unto the sea. And behold, there cometh one of the rulers of the synagogue, Jairus by name. And when he saw him, he fell at his feet, and besought him greatly, saying, My little daughter lieth at the point of death. I pray thee, come and lay thy hands on her, that she may be healed, and she shall live. And Jesus went with him, and much people followed him, and thronged him. And a certain woman, which had an issue of blood 12 years, and had suffered many things of many physicians, and had spent all that she had, and was nothing bettered, but rather grew worse, when she had heard of Jesus, came in the press behind, and touched his garment. For she said, If I may touch but his clothes, I shall be whole. And straightway the fountain of her blood was dried up, and she felt in her body that she was healed of that plague. And Jesus, immediately knowing in himself that virtue had gone out of him, turned him about in the press, and said, Who touched my clothes? And his disciples said unto him, Thou seest the multitude thronging thee, and thou sayest, Who touched me? And he looked round about to see her that had done this thing. But the woman, fearing and trembling, knowing what was done in her, came and fell down before him, and told him all the truth. And he said unto her, Daughter, thy faith hath made thee whole. Go in peace, and be whole of thy plague. While he yet spake, there came from the ruler of the synagogue's house certain which said, Thy daughter is dead. Why troublest thou the master any further? As soon as Jesus heard the word that was spoken, he saith unto the ruler of the synagogue, Be not afraid, only believe. And he suffered no man to follow him, save Peter, and James, and John, the brother of James. And he cometh to the house of the ruler of the synagogue, and seeth the tumult, and them that wept and wailed greatly. And when he was come in, he saith unto them, Why make ye this ado, and weep? The damsel is not dead, but sleepeth. And they laughed him to scorn. But when he had put them all out, he taketh the father and the mother of the damsel, and them that were with him, and entered in where the damsel was lying. And he took the damsel by the hand, and said unto her, Talitha cumi, which is, being interpreted, Damsel, I say unto thee, arise. And straightway the damsel arose and walked, for she was of the age of 12 years. And they were astonished with great astonishment. And he charged them straitly that no man should know it, and commanded that something should be given her to eat.
That was Mark chapter 5, verses 21 through 43. We see that Jesus goes on his way to help Jairus, a religious leader. This time it was a religious leader that needed the help of Jesus. And on the way, there was a woman who had a chronic bleeding for 12 years. And because she had this illness, she was not allowed into the places of worship. That's Leviticus chapter 15, verse 25. But she had faith that if I just touch the garment of Jesus, I'll be healed. Jesus felt the power go out from him. And then he asked. And then he called her daughter and said, Your faith has saved you. You have to remember that up until this point, this woman was excluded from the family of God. And that was until she put her faith in Jesus. And then in verses 35 through 43, after Jesus healed this woman, they informed Jairus that his daughter had died. Now, these people, they underestimated Jesus. They actually thought that all he could do was just heal the sick. They had no idea that Jesus can raise people from the dead. Jesus tells Jairus, just believe and don't doubt. Jesus takes Peter, John, and James, and that's because in the Torah it says everything must be established on the testimony of 2 to 3 witnesses. You can read about that in Deuteronomy 17:6. And after Jesus had raised the girl from the dead, Jesus said, feed her. He gave instructions to feed the girl. Now, us as adults, it's our responsibility to teach Jesus, like spiritually feed our children, which is the next generation of Christians, to feed them on the spiritual knowledge of Jesus Christ. A great biblical example of that, you can read about that in Acts chapter 16, verse 1, where it speaks of Timothy and his mother. They were both Christians. We're going to stop right here, and we're going to continue in Mark chapter 6. Thank you.